Our next speaker has got to follow that act. Is director of the Sustainable Development Center at Sciences Po in Paris and is on the board of the French Agricultural Research Center for International Development, has been an advisor to PM Lionel Jospin, a long list of credits. Please put your hands together to welcome Laurence Tubiana. Laurence.
Thank you. Of course, I am impressed to speak after two so brilliant speakers, and with the admiration I have for them, and in particular for Manfela and the work she done in her country. I think my speech this morning would be more of a testimony than a sort of academic presentation. In Rio, 20 years ago, I was a professor in international economics, involved in the Earth Summit, and I was looking at the people were the artisan of the Stockholm 1972 summit as a sort of the past. And now, 20 years after, I am really puzzled with, at the same time, the progress we made compared to that period and the challenges. And in a way, we were so optimistic in this period of Rio, looking at Stockholm and saying, now it's serious. Environment, integrating environment in the economy, that's serious. We were in a period of really optimism on multilateral action and the elaboration of agreed common rules. We were optimistic that with the end of Cold War, the WTO settlement, the progress on a number of issues at global level, with the idea that if we internalize the cost of environment in the economy, is about that. That is a serious political economy. It's not about dreaming about environment. It's about really making things happen. And in Rio, that was this feeling that we got it, like a former US president in his electoral campaign saying, it is the economy stupid. I think in Rio we thought that really it was that. And if we really, we had a serious political economy of the issue with a whole, this head of states at Rio, really the idea that globalization, yes, we could make globalization work for the sustainable development. We were really optimistic about that. Of course, when we look at the situation today, not only the balance of what we achieve or not, but the situation, of course, it's a very different period. There is really a lack of leadership. And when we talk about governance, and in that time, governance was very much about making the market work for the environment with institutions that could really support this movement. We know, of course, nowadays that we cannot achieve with that. We have to do very different things. And at the same time, we don't have any strong leadership at global level. This end of the story, of the history, a period where Rio was very much about that, has given the floor to the very different and potentially very competitive powers. Economic power has been reshuffled since Rio, but we didn't have any real shift on the governance structure. And I think it's one, of course, a basic feature of these problems we face today. Being in Copenhagen as a climate negotiator, I saw the end of the old world when President Obama met with the leaders of the basic countries and where he has to accept the deal which was really prepared by China, India, Brazil, and South Africa. But then Rio plus 20, certainly it's over. The idea that the end of the old world is done. So what would be Rio plus 20 as a signal? The birthday of our 20 years or 40 years now, our efforts, and the recognition of the exhaustion of the economic model and the governance structure built after World War II. And I think this changing scene is really dominating our view of what the new governance should be. What are the new features of this scene that can sort of shape our thinking about governance? Well, of course, these emerging powers and their clear preference for sovereignty. Doesn't mean that these countries, and I think about China, and I think about South Africa and Brazil and many others, doesn't care for common goals, doesn't care for our global commons. But they have a strong demand of the recognition of their own way, of their own decision-making. That, of course, the end of the old world. But at the same time, this preference for sovereignty, which can be a clear obstacle to common action, collective action, cooperation, is challenged by other phenomena, other trends in the political scene. I don't know how really to name that. It's both, I think, the politics and the policies. The local authorities, I think that is an emerging factor we saw in different places emerging, challenging national governments. These local authorities who have done maybe so much about implementing the Rio Agenda has really tried in many places to invent solutions to manage common pool resources. And now they want to be linked to the resolution of the management of global commons, and they are challenging their government in many, many countries. And of course, we had what we saw already in Rio, these global networks in place, scientific communities, private sector, civil society, all these are the new feature. And you see, there is a contradiction here between sort of a classical demand for sovereignty and new features which are really operating at very different scales. And at the same time, we don't have, I think, the DNA for really making all these new features compatible in the same framework. What did we achieve? We achieved successes, of course, in raising the profile of environmental issues, in mainstreaming and integrating environmental concerns, developing new scientific and policy capabilities, creating new agreements, structure, funds, and entities. We have done all that. But at the same time, we have signs of stagnating and fragmented global regime for the environment and sustainable development. We have sustainable development as, I must say, not an operational tool, but a diagnosis tool. We see that through this concept that we are not there. We see what the failures we are facing. We can define overarching objective in terms of reducing carbon emission, in terms of water management, in terms of food security, but we don't know what the action between the actual situation, the failures, and the goal. We don't know the pathways. Sustainable development hasn't really given, as a concept, tools to define the pathways. And I think that's the problem of the governance, to really be able to trace, design, develop the pathways to go there. So the challenges we have in this problem of the governance 2.0, the organizers of the conference put that nice title. We have, of course, the fragmentation, institutional proliferation, failed collective action in a number of international organizations, UN bodies, agencies, conventions, the difficulties of putting them together. We have really clearly a deficient authority. We contest authority of the scientific bodies many times. There is a lack of a strong political base for international environment governance, and we have insufficient legitimacy, many times because of the equity and equality problems Manfela and Richard mentioned. I think I want to just take 2 minutes to discuss a major issue, in particular in this conference, the science and policy relationship. Successes and failures. All the controversies around IPCC results has shown that it is urgent, important, tremendously important that scientific community is really entitled and protected on the point of view of this authority and legitimacy. So at the same time, we have to recognize the policy role or the political role of science, not as such, but because science puts in front of the agenda the problems we have to resolve as societies. So there is, of course, a strong interaction. But so I think we have, with all the lessons of the past, to organize a proliferation of scientific assessment and interaction with policy, but at the same time, recognize and protect authority and legitimacy to the scientific communities. I think we have to accept, but we have to manage controversies, not what they are for the moment. And we have to really think that expertise should not substitute negotiation among actors. And I think for the new governance system we have to build, that will be a very important pillar. We know the goals, as I said, to improve problem solving, to improve collective action, to enhance legitimacy through more participation, more equity. We have to widen the policy space for countries, for societies, for groups. And we have really to clarify the relationship between trade, environment, and development intersection. But above all, we have to improve fairness. We cannot have a new system. We cannot not have a progress in cooperative action at global level without improved fairness. And that is about capacity, capabilities, common responsibilities, and of course finance and technology transfer. But we have to do all this a very limited imagination. What I feel, I don't know what you think, but I think we have a huge past dependencies there. We discuss governance reform as if in 1948, about building institutions, about the mandate of this institution, and at the same time, and I think what Richard expressed in his presentation is that we have to change the consciousness, the minds, the interactions. So we have to be much more inadequate to what the structures, the trends, the actors are in this world. And I'm concerned about this past dependency because it is not about building another institutions. It's about shaping expectation. We have to share the vision not of one pathway, but several pathways potentially going to the same goals. That is, understanding prosperity not as the accumulation of more and more material consumption. We have to understand prosperity with equality. We have to understand prosperity as a very different model which is not measured only by the economic growth rate. So it is about changing expectation, about changing consciousness with institution in parallel, and not thinking that institution will do the job alone. I think we have to maybe restore the value of cooperation in the governance models. Already in the companies, in the modern companies of this world, of this 21st century, we see that competition is controlled because you need cooperation among people, among actors, and we need that at global level. So, for example, for technology, for innovation in technology, we need arrangements that can favor cooperation, that can really solve intellectual property rights problems, that can really enhance scaling up the solutions. And above all, and to end on that, we need learning processes at the core of the reform. We need experiment, we need imagination. And I think is, for the moment, what is really lacking in the discussion on this global governance. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurence. A really clear analytical framework there. We have a question for you here from Itsuku C. Hando from the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature in Kyoto, who asks, could you please tell us a bit more about how to enhance functions of the suggested global network nodes and two-way ties between the nodes?
It's a key element because we have all the technical means to do that. We have this enormous information technology capacity, but at the same time, we don't know how to define the role and responsibilities of this. What is the responsibilities of communities, the cities, the companies, and what the relationship with the state and the government. And partly all the discussion previously was how do we balance state and market? It was the only main question. And now the question is very different.
Because there are so many more players.
Yeah, many more players, and it is not about market and state. It's about different scales in space and in time. So I think we have to invent a sort of accountability type of relationship with discussing goals and discussing pathways. I think the trajectory issues is a way that the different nodes can be improved. So I was thinking more in learning processes, trying to make expectation converge through these information flows.
Itsuki, please find Laurence in the break and take that conversation further. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.